Today, let's discuss the clavicle. The clavicle is a long bone of the body, and it is a bone that supports the shoulder so that the arm can swing clearly away from the trunk. The clavicle tends to transmit the weight of the limb to the sternum. Now let's talk about how we can know whether this clavicle is the right clavicle or the left clavicle. Having looked at this bone clearly, there are three major features you have to consider while trying to be specific of the type or the side of the bone, if it is the left or the right. Now, this is the clavicle, and it has a lateral end and a medial end. This lateral end is flattened from above downwards, while this medial end is quadrilateral or bulbous in shape. Okay, now this clavicle is divided into three parts: the lateral end, the medial end, and the shaft. Now, the side determination of this clavicle is the lateral end is concave forward, and convex backwards. Convex, this is convex, this is concave. So it's concave forward and convex backwards, while the medial end is convex forward and concave backwards. So if you know that the lateral end is concave forward and convex backwards, and the medial end is convex forward and concave backward, and that the lateral end is flat, and that the medial end is quadrilateral, then you are going to know that this clavicle is the left clavicle, because this clavicle has the lateral end or the acromion end that articulates with the acromion process of the scapula to form the acromioclavicular joint, while the medial end, which is quadrilateral, articulates with the sternum to form the sternoclavicular joints. Then the peculiarities of this clavicle. This clavicle is a long bone, but it is the only long bone in the body that lies horizontally. It does not lie vertically. The clavicle is not like this. All other long bones like the humerus, the ulna, the radius, the femur, the tibia, the fibula, all of them lies vertically. So the clavicle is the only long bone in the body that lies horizontally. It lies like this. And it is the only long bone in the body that ossifies from a membrane. So the clavicle has an intramembranous ossification, while all other long bones has an endochondral ossification, which simply means it ossifies from cartilage and not from a membrane. The clavicle is the only long bone, is the first long bone, or the first bone in the body rather, to start ossifying. So it is the first bone in the body to start ossification, which means ossification intrauterine life, which means it is the first bone in the body that starts to form. Ossification simply means bone formation. So those are the uniqueness or the peculiarities of the clavicle. And also it is the only long bone that is subcutaneous throughout. So this clavicle is subcutaneous throughout. That means you can feel the clavicle. You can touch the clavicle and feel it. Unlike all other bones, you cannot touch and really feel it. So it is subcutaneous throughout. Then the features of the clavicle. So the features of the clavicle has the lateral end and the medial end, and it also has a shaft. So before talking about the lateral end and the medial end, let's talk about the shaft. The shaft is divisible into the lateral 1/3. This is the lateral 1/3, and the medial 2/3. This is the medial 2/3. So the lateral one-third is flattened from above downwards. This is the lateral one-third and it's flattened from above downwards. It has two borders. It has two borders. The anterior border and the posterior border. So the anterior border and the posterior border. So the anterior border is concave forward, while the posterior border is convex backwards. Now it also has two surfaces, the superior surface and the inferior surface. So the superior surface is subcutaneous and the inferior surface presents an elevation called the conoid tubercle. This tubercle is just like an elevation. This is the inferior surface of the lateral one-third. So it presents an elevation called the conoid tubercle and a ridge called the what? The trapezoid ridge. So the lateral end or the lateral one-third has anterior border, posterior border, superior surface, inferior surface. So now let's talk about the medial two-third. The medial two-third is rounded. It has no borders, but it has surfaces. It has about 4 surfaces. It has the anterior surface, which is convex forward. It has the posterior surface, which is concave backwards. It has the superior surface, which is rough in its medial ends. It's rough in its medial end or the medial part. Then it has the inferior surface, which has a rough oval impression at the medial end. This rough oval impression is called the costoclavicular tuberosity or the rhomboid tuberosity. This is really very important because it serves as an attachment site for the costoclavicular ligaments. When we are talking about the attachment, you appreciate it the more. This costoclavicular ligament connects the clavicle to the first rib. That is the work of the costoclavicular ligament. So what gives an attachment to the costoclavicular ligament is the costoclavicular tuberosity, which is a rough oval impression found at the what? Inferior surface of the medial end of the medial two-third of the clavicle. Also, the costoclavicular ligament plays a role in stabilizing this clavicle and limiting its movement in order to prevent dislocation of the sternoclavicular joint, because this is where the sternoclavicular joint forms, because it's going to be articulating with the what? With the sternum to form the sternoclavicular joint, while this one will be articulating with the acromion of the scapula to form the acromioclavicular joint. So this one will articulate with the clavicular notch of the manibrum sterni. So it articulates with the clavicular notch of the manibrum sterni in order to form the sternoclavicular joint. So this is the shaft of the clavicle. Now let's talk about the ends of the clavicle. It has the lateral end and the medial end. The lateral end is also known as the acromial end, while the medial end is also known as the sternal end. The lateral end is flattened from above downwards, as I've said initially, and it bears a facet which articulates with the acromion process of the scapula to form the acromioclavicular joint, while the medial end is quadrangular or quadrilateral and articulates with the clavicular notch of the manibrum sterni to form the sternoclavicular